Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Virgin Suicides. This film came out in the year 2000. It was written and directed by Sofia Coppola. Of course, Miss Coppola was a woman that was born into Hollywood royalty, and she's been surrounded by these iconic minds, these artistic minds her entire life. And she has been criticized, or her acting success, her directing success has been criticized by a lot of people. Some people attribute it to nepotism. And then there are other people that totally disagree with that. They see her as having a really special point of view, a special artistic voice. I don't really think that nepotism is really that interesting of a criticism because, I mean, let's face it, if my father were Francis Ford Coppola, I'd be taking advantage of that too. And I'm guessing so would you. And I really think truly over time, a film director or actor's background becomes less and less relevant. The work will begin to either stand on its own merit or not stand on its own merit. And I think for Sofia, she's gained a lot of cult status in maybe a couple areas with a couple of her films. Lost in Translation probably being her major cult classic in her career. That's a movie I haven't seen in years and years and years, so I do not feel comfortable giving an opinion on it at this point. But, you know, from what I do remember about it, because I did watch it a lot as a teenager, it did, you know, it was very interesting. It was kind of a way to bring back a sort of French New Wave feel. It's kind of a stripped down emotional portrait that really, you know, touched a nerve with people. For me overall, you know, if you look at her body of work, I think, even though I do think she's very talented in certain areas, I think that she's more interested in aesthetics than she is real kind of emotional resonance or meaning behind, you know, all the like the pastel colors and like the synth-based soundtracks. Admittedly, as a teen, I was more drawn to aesthetics in the way that a lot of people are drawn to something before they really understand it. And so I was a huge fan of hers, huge fan. I think as a creator, you've got to understand that there is a huge difference between exploring something and embellishing something. And I think a lot of times we hide behind our ability to embellish, if that's our strong suit. Somewhere, Bling Ring, Marie Antoinette, all of these movies fall under this category. And then came the movie The Beguiled, which I am a huge fan of the original Beguiled film from the 1970s. And she somehow made a movie that is almost exact in structure, and the runtime is very similar to the original, and yet she managed to drain all of the sex, all of the violence, all of the perversion, all of the juicy, good stuff that is really the binding for the whole idea behind the story and threw it out the window. And the worst part to me is that she took out certain aspects of the original story just because she didn't want to ruffle feathers, because she didn't want to create controversy, which to me is very insulting to the source material and just insulting to creativity in general. But yeah, she decided to go more for no, everything's gonna be implied, kind of beneath the genteel southern exterior, but it just doesn't work. It falls completely flat. So yes, I do think she's overrated. I do struggle with her work overall. However, I do think that for her directorial debut, The Virgin Suicides, for all of Sofia's faults, I think The Virgin Suicides is absolutely fantastic. It plays to many of her strengths as an artist while always keeping the pain and viscera of youth very close to the chest. It never really wanes. One of her big staples, of course, is that sort of hipster aesthetic, which is, of course, very much a novelty. It's very externally driven, especially in our culture. But I love how she uses it here because it feels very warm and very personal. It works so well in this movie, I think, because it is about young people. It's about what it's like to be young, specifically about young women who live in a world that doesn't want them to express themselves, to be themselves, or be willing to explore anything, to discover their identities. And that is something that thematically we see in a lot of Sofia Coppola films. There's that dreamy, very ethereal, hazy quality to her movies that's very well done, and everything, especially in this movie, feels like little Polaroid snapshots, memories of youth. And I think Sofia knows a lot about the textures and details of these things and of this time because she can relate to it. You know, she was a young girl growing up in the 1970s, a privileged young girl. Sometimes the moments feel very vivid, like where you can almost, it feels like you can almost reach out and touch them. And then in other moments, they feel a bit faded, like almost like you're looking back at a mosaic or something. I know I say that a lot, but it's true. Where it feels maybe a little bit hardened by time. And that's, you know, that's just how memories work. Sometimes they're so strong that you almost feel like you are literally right back in the moment that it happened with the sounds and the smells and everything. And then at other times you do feel quite removed. You see a lot of her influences coming through very strongly here. That kind of sensory artificial quality of maybe like a Brian De Palma film, especially Carrie. You see a lot of influence there. And of course, like I mentioned, that sort of new wave kind of breathy, almost improvisational feel, that sort of simplicity, I think she finds very appealing. Taken a little bit further in Lost in Translation, but I see kind of the seeds being planted. And as far as the script goes, yes, it is less about the internal conflict, and it is more, like I said, it just feels like you're stepping back and looking at this big mosaic of kind of American suburban life. It is a time capsule of sorts, seen through the eyes of somebody who was once a young child experiencing all those things. And you know, as a kid, just the weight of certain circumstances, the weight of certain situations don't really sink in the way that they often do as an adult. And the consequences aren't as fully felt because we're not old enough to understand them yet. And that's why I think her style is so perfectly suited for this, because it's more about mood and less about like the depth of the characters. It's expressing what is right at the fingertips and what is wanting to just burst from the chest impulsively. And as audience members, we know these feelings because we've been there. You know, we, like, say you remember your first kiss or something. Rarely do you look back on it, it's going to be romantic with sweeping music. It's like, no, we were in my car. It was really hot summer day and I had sweat all in my armpits and I was nervous about that. I had like sticky lip gloss I was trying to wipe off so I could get ready for this kiss. You know, that's what you remember, those little details. And I also think the narration is very interesting too, because it's seen through the eyes of somebody else. I mean, yes, the virgin suicides, you know, they're referring to, you know, that it's about a family of sisters, but it's not told through their eyes. It's told through the eyes of the young boys across the street. And I think there's something kind of beautiful about that. These kids are just babies, you know, they haven't been burned even remotely yet. And so they're just very curious. And having that perspective, seeing that perspective at a time when you know it's something that's not going to last, there's something very precious about it. And yes, the narration at times can be very writery and sometimes a little bit too on the nose for me, but I think that it feels, just in terms of what he's saying, it feels very realistic to this young boy who's admiring a girl from afar, admiring a girl next door. The attraction is very confusing to him. The mystery of girls and how they're perceived and how they're so different from boys. How they sense the mystery, yet they maybe romanticize that beauty and allure, but I think most importantly, they see that these girls, even if they may not understand it, they see that these girls are in pain. An adult can look at these girls and say, well, what do they have to worry about? You know, they have everything. They live in such a beautiful house and they're beautiful young girls. They've got the world ahead of them. What do they have to be sad about? And, you know, those young boys don't feel the same way because it's, you know, all that's less relevant to them. What they care about is how can we get in a room with them? How can we protect them? How can we make them smile? I don't know. I just think there's something very lovely about that. And even though this is a film that is very dark, it's also, you know, has a sense of humor. It's definitely kind of a satirical suburban tale, which is common, you know, like the comedy of manners, exaggerating the social class and such. And I really love the adults in this movie, particularly the parents of these girls, just because I think, you know, yes, they are kind of like this looming shadow over these girls, kind of like forcing them to try to stay innocent and remain under their control. And yet, at the same time, they do feel very real and relatable, even though they are not explored in any depth. James Woods, I think, is absolutely wonderful in this movie. I think he is kind of perfectly awkward and dorky and completely out of touch with the current times. And yet you sense there is kind of a real pain. And his wife, played by Kathleen Turner, I think she's wonderful in the film because, you know, she's given pretty standard mom type dialogue. And yet I think she's able to pull a lot out of very little because you can also sense just how badly she's hurting. I mean, imagine being a mother, you know, in that situation. Talk about devastating. But yet she's always, you know, she's hardened. She's trying to remain composed and elegant, refusing to recognize that her methods of discipline are destructive, and she doesn't really realize that. Maybe she does somewhere internally, but it's not clicking with her. But yeah, I really think this is a film really worth your time. For me, maybe, I mean, I do kind of want to go back and watch Lost in Translation again, but for me, just right now, I see this easily as her most interesting film, her most balanced film. It's the one time where all of those elements that are her strengths come together in a really kind of cohesive way. And yeah, it just feels like, you know, when you hit that sweet spot of the bat in a home run. I watched some sort of film essay or part of one, and I can't even remember what it is at this point on YouTube, but they were talking about Sofia Coppola and kind of defending her as very kind of like uniquely auteur and saying that a lot of her criticisms come from the fact that she is a female director and that her movies are about females, and I call such bullshit on that. I don't think it has anything to do with her gender. I think it just has to do with merit Simple as that. And her movies tend to just be oftentimes smoke and mirrors, abstractions that aren't really connected to anything that is grounded, that is resonant. And when I look at this movie and I look at, The Beguiled, which came out many years later, it's like, both of them have the thing in common where, they're both about women, but they're also they're both adapted from novels. And yet, Virgin Suicides, to me, just all of the emotion and the palpability of it just rings all the way through it. Whereas with the Beguiled, it was kind of gutting all the things that are interesting and unique about the novel, as if she had no comprehension of it. So that just goes to show you the difference, I think. But as I said before, The Virgin Suicides is something you can absolutely feel, and it's meaningful. Even that hipster exterior, just like the aged wallpaper and the pastels and all of that, it's got a tinge of bitterness. And I don't know, when I was watching it this last time, I kept thinking about a piece of music by Sufjan Stevens, and it's called 4th of July. Beautiful song. And yeah, look it up on YouTube if you haven't heard it. But if you like that song, I think you'll really like The Virgin Suicides. But that's just my 2 cents. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Over here, you will see my Patreon supporters. The link to support is below. Also, all of my social media information is below that. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.